Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on leveraging product mastery tools for evolving customer of one market opportunities. Today's presenter is Brian Kim, President and CEO of HighRoads. I would now like to turn it over to Brian to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Brenna. Appreciate it. And thank you all for joining today. I appreciate you all spending the time and making this investment and looking forward here in our industry. So let me just dive right into it because I'm pretty eager to share the opportunity and share the observations that we've seen around the industry, as well as this burgeoning change that we've seen and the opportunity that it presents for payers to differentiate themselves and win. I've been serving payers, a bit of background. I've been serving payers for over 20 years in one form or another, and I'm really excited about this change that we're seeing in the marketplace and ultimately this opportunity to create advantages for the entire front office and notably around product management to fundamentally change the nature and success of health plans. So we have an hour scheduled here. We may go a little bit less than that. It's probably likely less than that unless we get quite a few questions. But we'll run through it and share the insights that we've gleaned so far. Finally, I would note before we get started, I am a bit under the weather, so please excuse any sneezes or sniffling that one might hear as we go through this. So let's just jump right into it. Let's see if I can jump into it. There we go. So really starting out with a view of what's happening in the industry right now, what's happening in your market. You know, we're really looking at two constituents, your customers, your large group, your group customers, and your individual small group customers. But looking first at your large group, I mean, fundamentally, they've got a problem. You know, they have this thing that's supposed to be a benefit. It is. It's part of the package that they offer, and it's changing. It's becoming something that instead of satisfying employees, becomes something that is more painful. It's feeling less and less like a true benefit. You could see the lines on the chart here, but it's worth actually nailing down what these numbers are doing. Overall, so if you look from 99 to 2016, those 17 years, if you look at what's happened in that time, inflation in total has grown about 44%. That's with all the compounding, et cetera, it's 44%. And earnings have actually outpaced inflation a little bit, which is great for workers, obviously. But what's terrifying is while their earnings have gone, the dollar in 1999 is now $1.60. That same dollar in terms of health premiums to what it is today is jumping to $3.13. And their contribution is jumping from $1 to $3.42, which is to say nothing of the changes associated with their benefits. So in terms of higher co-pays, higher deductibles, etc. So something fundamentally different has happened here that makes a benefit less a benefit. And then, you know, in some ways, even more disturbingly, we've got individuals and families. They're struggling to figure out what they're going to do here. Obviously, you know, just fundamentally, we're looking at nearly half of Americans. 44% of people are looking for health insurance outside of their job. They are struggling. The majority, you can see these numbers, the majority can't find it. They can't afford it. They can't understand it. It's an incredible problem in terms of how do they go out and avoid the fundamental risk of the $20,000 inpatient admission for something even relatively minor. The one-day admission is $20,000. So how do they get to that point? I mean, obviously, the underlying cost trend in terms of medical costs, it drives most of this. Obviously, that's the case. But at the same time, we as an industry, you as an industry, have this opportunity, have this ability to tweak and design products by segment, by sub-segment, really optimize what's possible for various customer segments. But right now, because of what you have, it's often a peanut butter-based approach. Just spread it across and keep pretty consistent benefits across the industry. Now, obviously, you do have some segments, and that's happening, which is great. but how much more can you do? How much more flexibility, how much more creativity can you show? Now, layered on top of that, there's something really interesting happening in just broader industry, broader market, especially in the consumer space. Obviously, you have some examples here on the right, as well as an enterprise example in the form of Vistaprint, which is enterprise, SMB primarily for Vistaprint, but increasingly going to larger and larger employers. But what we see here is fundamentally these types of businesses and what they are offering today is so fundamentally different than what was offered even 10 years ago. The changing consumer expectations of the type of service, the type of engagement, the type of ability that they have to really drive for them, to be that customer of one. I want what I want, and I am, for the purposes of this, special. So how do you get to that point? How do you support those consumers? And remember, consumers are also enterprise buyers. They're the same people who are working on behalf of their businesses, on behalf of their employers, to buy in a way that makes sense for them and for their employers. Those expectations that they get on the consumer side completely translate. So when we think about what type of flexibility they want, so let's use this example of BMW down here, which, in this case, it happens to be a very expensive car, but it goes down to their base model cars. Toyota does this. Ford does this. GM does this. Everyone now has understood the table stakes are this flexibility for a consumer to get guidance around what type of packages are available, and then to be able to go really granular if they want. So certainly, they can buy the performance package. It comes with a certain set of wheels. But then they want a special set of wheels because that's what they're into. They can go and choose that, pay for that, and say that is a benefit to me and that is part of what I'm willing to spend. That ability to go deep in terms of the flexibility and to have that, again, flexibility to really customize the specific, really nuanced items, which are incredibly important to them, but may not be important to somebody else. Then they're also, at the same time, they're looking for an answer-seeking capability. Progressive here with Name Your Price, which is obviously directly translatable to what we're talking about in healthcare. They're obviously doing it from a property casualty, notably auto, perspective. And yes, health plans, health benefit packages are orders, plural, of magnitude more complex than auto insurance. Absolutely the case. But it's still knowable. It's still definable. And how can we create that type of on-demand answer-seeking capability? All of this is overlaid with the point of, I want to do it now. If I'm there on Vistaprint, Progressive, BMW, name your auto dealership, you can buy that product right away. Now, with the car, it's a slightly more jumps in terms of actually having to talk to somebody. But I can send over to a dealership saying, this is the car I want. Let's finalize it. Let's order it. Let's get it done. That's all right there. And it needs to get done right away. Why? So why is this important to you? Well, you know what they're doing? What they're doing is understanding a fundamental truth of sales. And I think everyone knows this. Articulated two different ways. One is time kills deals. You need to get it done right away. And then there's the old Glengarry Glen Ross chestnut of always be closing. It's sales 101. Fulfill the need right away. Simplify it. Have the empathy and the understanding inside that user experience for that customer to be able to fulfill their need right away. So the tool to support the closing of that sale has to be right there. Customize it. Give me the packages. Give me the deep details. Price it, quote it right away. Get it all linked together. Give it to me right now. So ultimately, it's this whole idea of, again, closing the deals faster with the right tools. If the tools don't support it, you can't do that. You have to be able to do this customized on demand and this dynamic pricing and quoting. This is all about when that broker, that salesperson, sits down with the customer, be it an enterprise customer or even, for example, a senior. How do they select the right product? How do they price their right product? Now, obviously, there are limitations as you think about individual business, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the opportunities to have that interaction and to get to closing is the way to succeed, is the way to drive new sales, and is the way to get faster renewals. On top of that, we talked about, and I mentioned it was about salespeople succeeding, but guess what? Why do you always need salespeople to mediate? In fact, many of the times you won't. And obviously, it's being mediated certainly in small business by brokers, et cetera. But, frankly, as a small business operator, as a business operator, I don't want to necessarily deal with a broker. I'd much rather be able to do this direct, to be able to simplify it, to be able to get it done. Why can't I jump in and create the product that I want? Or even better yet, say, okay, you have my census. I can even upload that. Show me what my rates would be. Show me where I can go with this. How can I flex what's happening with price points? How can I choose that price point and get a simple understanding of where I would need to tweak? So this is actually an example screenshot of our solution, whereby I can slide back and forth different values around out-of-pocket, around deductible, all of these capabilities to understand how does that drive my pricing, and or if I move this needle and I've locked my pricing, how do I, what other things change in order to make that work? So, again, closing the loop, getting the full cycle of understanding what's possible, and then finalizing it with those communications. Ultimately, this needs to be finished with the plan documents, with connections to other systems, and that all has to be baked together. So, look, if you're living in the plan right now, doing this job today, this all feels very pipe dreamish. It feels like a real extension and somewhat like dreamland. But this is a vision that we think is eminently achievable in the near future, because a lot of the pieces are there. In fact, all of the pieces are there, but you just don't have it yet. You don't have it in hand. But what you have in hand is something that in many ways doesn't work. It doesn't work because it's just more complicated and manual than it needs to be, because you don't have the tools to be able to do it with. I mean, if you look again back at our old the examples that we talked about in terms of Vistaprint and Progressive, etc. When you look at what they do, on the face of it, there's great sizzle. It shows really well. And I've been lucky enough to have the opportunity to look under the hood with some of these folks. What's under the hood, the stake of what they do, is really good as well. They've done an amazing job. They have great tools to support all of these capabilities and to make it easy for consumers and enterprises to buy. Hey, how many health plans can actually say that? There's so many health plans are dependent fundamentally on duct tape and sneaker nets. So when we look at these points, what we're looking at is there's how many benefit grids do you handle today? How many different versions of a single benefit grid are floating around in your organization? Is there a single place that everyone agrees and says, yes, that's truth. That's what we sold as a product. If you had the head of sales, the head of product, the head of claims, all asked a detailed question, what's the copay or what's the cost share in the out-of-network tier for inpatient behavioral health benefits in rehab versus hospital? Now, that's a really detailed question. Obviously, everyone's looking it up. But the scary part is a lot of the times, you're going to hear 3 different answers come back, because it's that complicated. Because not only is it that detailed a question, it's which plan? Is it that HMO select product that we tweaked for XYZ tool company? Okay, now we've done something different, and what's the cost share there? So there's a level of complexity that we have to handle, and the only way to handle that is by having that deep repository that will hold all of this together. And on top of that, you're handing off those same documents that we're talking about, the sneaker net. It's, instead of, again, being able to look into one place, it's, oh, email me that. Email me the benefit grid as you've updated it so I can configure it for the claim system, so I can sell it to the customer. When you start laying those on top and then you're dependent upon version control, manual version control, in order to get your review done, you're introducing so many opportunities for error and obviously just the drag associated, the time associated to get this done. You're depending on your memory, others' memory to review, to know that they've reviewed, to know that they've sent it forward to other people. It's what you get ultimately at the end of the day is a bit of confusion or a lot of confusion inside your organization that you really hope ultimately doesn't get in the member's hands or the account's hands. So that's what's happening today, and that's fundamentally always going to hold you back. And so there are a lot of solutions that are coming to fore. Obviously, I'm talking about one, but one thing that we started to see is CRM packages. And stating it very baldly, don't believe the hype. When once upon a time, in my career of serving health plans, I was actually part of course admin systems, claims systems, implementations. And when we did those, we talked about it as claims systems. Claims are often the beating heart of a health insurance company. You pay claims. And so when you change out a claim system, you're talking about a heart-lung transplant. And that swap out of claim system has heart-lung transplant-like morbidity and mortality. Plans die. Plans get in deep trouble, and the occasional plan dies because it's done so badly, or often as not gets sold for really pennies on the dollar. But the morbidity is actually much more interesting. The morbidity manifests itself in when you think about those claims replacement systems, you don't want to be the executive in charge, because something near half the time, that person's going to lose their job because it went badly, because it went over budget, whatever it might be, but they lose their job. And so, look, this situation where we're talking about changing the system of truth, defining what the products are going to be, communicating all of that, it's not as severe. I mean, let's say you're getting LASIK done, getting the laser eye surgery done. So let's say that's somewhat analogous. So it's important. You obviously don't want to get that messed up, but it's not necessarily life or death. But here, and so I should say, when you get that done, you have this great laser setup and something that really gives you confidence. But here what you're seeing when you talk about CRMs stepping into this situation, it's analogous to them walking in and saying, look, I got a really good scalpel and toolkit that worked awesome for these appendectomies I did. So it should work just fine for your eyes. Yeah, and look, in the early days, it was done that way. They actually did do eye surgery using a scalpel to make little fine cuts in the cornea. You could use a database that was designed for something else, change it around, make it do the various pieces that would hold some level of product. But why would you do that? Why would you take the risk? Because ultimately somebody's going to own this project. Somebody's going to be responsible for seeing the value out of it. And why would you take anything but a tool that was designed for that capability? So what we see and what we are talking about here is a platform that is purpose-built and driven for this use case, for this idea of tools and capabilities to support product management, and really by extension, the entire front end of a plan, because we're talking about product all the way through sales and installation and enrollment and ultimately servicing. How do you support that whole book of business? Yes, a CRM and sales systems and other things have a key piece of it, but the foundational piece is the single source of enterprise truth for the product. It's the ability to create the flexibility that the consumer is looking for that we've talked about. It's simplifying the processes. That shared understanding simplifies, it streamlines what's going on and allows that level of automation. And ultimately, again, it's always about communication. It's always about getting it to the member, to the account, to the internal constituents, so everyone is on the same page. at the most granular level of detail that need be about what is sold and what you're servicing to your clients. So when we think about this process, we're thinking about this new way of thinking about the entire life cycle, from product development through lead management, opportunity management. You can see the chevrons here, but you're getting through the proposal and then getting it actually in and servicing the account. There's all of this way to think about what's happening on the front end of your plan. This, one of the two core competencies of a health plan. One is paying claims, and the other is structuring and selling benefit packages. That's what this is about. And so when we think about the places where we need to think about product, this is where we're thinking about the product. Obviously when you're developing it, but when you match it up to your opportunity, what's the right thing to match up to that opportunity? What am I configuring, pricing, quoting? What's important to that proposal, and how is that going to drive that pricing/quote? And ultimately, how am I servicing it? Who needs to understand it? Customer service, claims, med management, as well as understanding, hey, guess what? There's this whole communication piece around the account and member that they need to understand it because, hey, that document that you're sending over, yeah, you might send them a contract, and obviously the contract needs to be generated and correct, and that's important. But then you also need to generate something they'll actually be able to digest, something that is defensible, something that is clear, something that helps them understand what their benefit is and use it appropriately. And so this is our focus. This is where HighRoads is fundamentally about supporting product. So when we think about where we're going from here, the point is making the front-end team, and notably product management, making them rock stars, giving you the ability to really simplify what you're doing, to make it easier to win, easier to differentiate yourselves in the market, to do it less expensively, to do it faster. And really, ultimately, all of this is about your being able to be freed up to do frankly, in some ways, the more important part of your jobs at the end of the day. How do you understand more about the market? Are you wholly dependent just on sales to come back and tell you, or do you spend more time in the market? Are you able to do more market research? Are you able to be more thoughtful about what's possible? Can you spend more time with network, with claims, with the salespeople in order to understand the degrees of freedom that you have and that you wish to apply, as well as the limitations, in order to create differentiated products, to be able to be not just responsive and reactive to competitive threats and regulatory requirements, but to actually be aggressive around them, to be able to get in front of it and make the market respond to you, and to create something that's different, that's innovative, and that will help you take market share. And doing all of that with this backdrop, with this ability, or the backstop, I should say, and the foundation to deliver products, to close on those products, and to be able to communicate all of this. So, look, ultimately what we're looking at and what we're eager about is this idea of just making it work for the customer, enterprise or consumer, giving them these complete capabilities, giving them the immediacy, the simplicity to understand what they're doing at that point of sale, to be able to close, to be able to buy, and to do it by putting it all together. So how do we integrate that experience and simplify it? How do we close the loop? And look, I have enormous respect for so many health plans who do such an amazing job of branding themselves, of communicating the value prop of what health plans can do. How do we create the stake that really supports that sizzle and support how we're doing that? So ultimately, when are we going to catch up to other insurance industries? When are we going to get there and offer comparable capabilities, offering them what the market wants? So, and ultimately, how do you win? So this is our view of how this would move forward. I'd be happy to take any questions that people might have.
Yes, we do have a few questions, Brian, from the audience that came in during the presentation. The first is, What do we really need to get to the name your price idea?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, and I didn't cover that particularly well here, so apologies. It's really three things, I believe, and I think those three things actually exist today, as I noted. One is obviously just the buying experience, the web front end. There are plenty of folks who've been doing sales front end, consumer experience front end, and candidly, it's been a bit of lipstick on the pig to date because they're literally taking paper documents and figuring out what the benefits are underneath it and then selling them. But with what they've had to work with, because that's all people can generally provide, they've been able to make a good shopping experience. Obviously, eHealth and Connecture and other folks have done a lot of that, as well as the quoting and pricing. That whole capability exists, and that's one key piece of it. But again, it's sort of built on this paper-based understanding of what's possible. On the other side, I think there's the automated pricing rating capability. And that does exist in the industry today, and it's not necessarily used as it could be. I think you get a lot of underwriting sort of art built into it. That's maybe not wholly necessary, but that's a second key part of it. And the third key part is something that, which is obviously something we're doing, but it's something that's relatively new to the industry, and that's what's making this possible. And it's foundational to making this possible, which is that deep level control, the deep level ability to manipulate the benefit structures at a deep level of detail if you want, but preferably at a higher level, and to have that be dynamic and dynamically linked to the other componentry. That's what needs to get put in place. That's what's necessary to be able to succeed in this idea.
Great. And the next question is actually a nice follow-up. How long should it take to really be operational?
Sure. It's wholly dependent upon what you have and what you wish to accomplish. And I think it's fundamentally important to know that you aren't going to do this, you shouldn't do this, just from a risk perspective and getting those quick wins perspective. It shouldn't be one big bang. I would expect this to take on the order of 6 to 12 months to do in totality, but you should be able to get your first wins in a matter of 2-3 months. Maybe even less than that, depending on line of business and so forth. But the ability to get into these systems quickly is really based on the idea that they're purpose-driven, they're purpose-built for this area. Not that you're taking a box of Legos and trying to create something from scratch.
Great. And finally, you mentioned custom document generation a couple of times. What do you mean by that exactly?
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. So obviously as planned, so on the commercial side, you're often required to create the summary of benefits and coverage at the SBC. And say on the Medicare side of the house, you're required to create the evidence of coverage documents. Those are regulatory required documents. And so, that's one piece. But think about the SBC and supporting group business, or think about creating an SPD or even just a marketing summary or sales summary of what was sold. Those, if you're customizing what your plan is, if you're changing up, what you've created, you need to be able to generate the communication for those. Now, part of the communication, and ideally most of the communication, is a direct interface with whatever you're using to generate and be that plan source of truth. But you also need members, accounts, regulators also need to know and see proof in the form of a document. And so going out and having this manually created after the fact is insanity. You'd want your system, you'd want your solution to be able to create that communication, to manage that communication across the board. And that's a critical piece of what we're doing.
Great. Well, thank you, Brian, and thank you all for joining this webinar on leveraging product mastery tools for evolving customer of one market opportunities. For more information, please visit HighRoads.com. Thank you again. You may now disconnect.